It was a quiet, seemingly ordinary day in a suburban neighborhood. The type of place where children played in the streets and neighbors exchanged greetings while walking their dogs. In the midst of this peaceful setting, Claire Thompson, a 25-year-old, single mother, lived with her 5-year-old daughter, Lily. From the outside, Claire appeared to have everything under control. She kept a tidy home, made sure Lily was well cared for, and even managed to maintain a job. But behind closed doors, things were far from normal. Over the past few months, Claire had begun to show signs of stress that no one seemed to notice. Her once bright personality had dulled, and she became withdrawn, her smile no longer reaching her eyes. She seemed perpetually exhausted, often too tired to engage in simple activities with Lily or socialize with friends. Instead of spending time playing with her daughter or enjoying the few moments of downtime she had, Claire was constantly pacing, lost in thought. The weight of a decision that had been consuming her for months was growing heavier with each passing day. She had started to question her ability to care for Lily. The little girl, full of energy and innocence, didn't understand the inner turmoil. Her mother was battling. She wanted to be loved and cared for, but Claire struggled to keep up with the demands of parenting. The guilt weighed on her, but it was compounded by the feeling of being completely overwhelmed. Claire wasn't just tired physically. She was emotionally drained and unsure of how to move forward. For months, she had been considering the idea of putting Lily up for adoption. At first, the thought seemed unimaginable. She loved her daughter, or at least she once had. But as the weeks went by, Claire began to question her ability to provide the love and care Lily deserved. The decision wasn't easy, and Claire knew that. It wasn't just the emotional toll of saying goodbye to her daughter. It was the practical challenges of the adoption process that made it seem so impossible. The adoption agencies had rejected Claire's applications more than once, citing her unstable living situation and her inability to prove she could provide for Lily's future. Every rejection felt like a blow to Claire's already fragile state of mind. She had tried everything: counseling, support groups, reaching out to family members, but nothing seemed to help. The pressure was suffocating, and with each failure, she felt more trapped. The thought of a better future for Lily, a future where she was cared for by people who could offer stability and love, became all-consuming. Despite her thoughts, Claire couldn't bring herself to go through with it. Every time she tried to take the next step, something stopped her. Perhaps it was the thought of what Lily would feel, the fear that her daughter would grow up without her, that held her back. The emotional conflict was too much for her to handle. But as the days stretched on, the idea lingered in the back of her mind, pushing Claire further into despair. She was at the breaking point, unsure of what to do next. No matter how much she wanted to break free from the overwhelming responsibility of motherhood, Claire couldn't escape the love she still had for Lily, however tangled that love had become. But deep down, Claire knew she could not continue this way forever. The pressure was becoming too much to bear, and as the months passed, the decision became more urgent. What Claire didn't realize, however, was how close she was to making a fateful decision that would not only change her life forever, but would alter the lives of everyone around her in unimaginable ways. The darkness that had slowly crept into her mind was on the verge of taking over, and the horror that would follow seemed inevitable. As days turned into weeks, Claire's life became more suffocating. Her apartment, once a place of warmth and laughter, now felt like a prison. The walls seemed to close in on her as she struggled to juggle the overwhelming responsibilities of motherhood. Lily, still so innocent and trusting, couldn't understand why her mother was so distant. She would ask, "Mom, why don't we play anymore?" Or, "Why are you always so tired?" But Claire would just smile weakly, offering excuses that felt hollow even to her own ears. The connection they once shared seemed to be fading, and the bond that had once been so strong now felt frayed and fragile. Claire tried to push through the exhaustion. She forced herself to attend to Lily's needs, but her mind was never fully present. Her thoughts were constantly elsewhere, on the decision that loomed over her like a dark cloud, one that she couldn't escape. She had thought about adoption more than she cared to admit, and each time she considered it, the thought seemed less like a solution and more like an escape. But it wasn't easy. Every adoption agency she contacted turned her down. They cited her instability, her inability to provide a suitable environment, and her fractured mental state. Claire couldn't blame them, but each rejection felt like another nail in her already shattered spirit. She had no one to turn to. Her family was distant. Her friends had their own lives, and Claire's pride wouldn't let her ask for help. She tried to reach out to counselors and therapists, but the sessions never seemed to offer any relief. Instead, they only made her feel more isolated. She felt as though she was trapped in a cycle of self-loathing and guilt, but the pressure to make a decision was mounting. Her thoughts became more disjointed, and her days blurred together. At times it felt like she was moving through life in a haze, unable to fully comprehend what was happening around her. In the quiet of her apartment, Claire found herself researching adoption, but each article she read only reinforced her fears. The adoption process was long and complicated, and the agencies made it clear that only those with stable jobs and secure homes stood a chance. But Claire knew she didn't fit the criteria. The weight of her own inadequacy pressed down on her, making her feel like a failure, not just as a mother, but as a person. The more she thought about it, the more helpless she felt. She couldn't escape the idea that she was failing Lily, failing to be the mother she needed and deserved. But that thought, failing Lily, was the hardest to bear. The little girl who had once filled Claire's life with so much joy now seemed like a constant reminder of Claire's limitations. Her cries, her laughter, her questions, they all felt like an added weight. Each time Claire looked at her, she was reminded of how much she had already sacrificed and how little she could offer in return. That's when the darkest thought entered Claire's mind. If adoption was out of reach, maybe there was another way out, a way that didn't involve rejection or the heartbreak of sending Lily away. At first, she dismissed the thought, horrified by it. But it kept creeping back, growing stronger with each passing day. She began to think about it more seriously, searching for methods, looking for ways to make it happen. The thought wasn't just about ending her own suffering anymore. It was about ending the suffering she believed Lily would face growing up with a mother who couldn't care for her. Claire's mind twisted further, and the horrifying realization took root. If she couldn't give Lily the future she deserved, then maybe the only way out was to erase everything, erase herself, erase Lily's pain, and end it all. The thought haunted her day and night, like an insidious whisper that she couldn't ignore. Every time Lily asked her to play or hugged her, the weight of the decision grew heavier, and Claire felt a sinking feeling deep in her chest. She wasn't sure how much longer she could keep pretending everything was okay. The darkness was closing in, and Claire was beginning to feel like there was no escape. The options seemed limited, and as her mind spiraled, so did her sense of reality. The idea of ending it all started to feel like the only way out, but she still wasn't sure how, until one day she discovered something that would change everything. Something that seemed twisted, but in her mind, it became a solution. It was a horrific thought, but in Claire's deteriorating state, it seemed to make sense, and soon, that twisted plan would become an unbearable reality. Claire's mind was consumed with the dark thoughts she could no longer ignore. The plan had taken shape in her mind over the past few days, but she struggled to face the full extent of what she was contemplating. She had gone over it again and again, her mind looping through the same horrific idea, until it felt like there was no other choice. The moment of clarity, though chilling, seemed to provide an escape she had longed for, a way to rid herself of the burden she felt weighed down by, while simultaneously silencing the whispers of guilt that plagued her every waking moment. In the dead of night, Claire began gathering what she would need. Her hands trembled as she researched more about the method she had discovered. She learned how to prepare the site, what materials were required, and how to execute the plan without leaving a trace. Each piece of information added a twisted sense of determination, and the idea that this could be the solution to her problems solidified in her mind. The more she focused on the technicalities, the less she thought about the consequences. It became less about the horror of the act itself, and more about the perceived relief it would bring. On the surface, Claire continued her routine. She acted like any other mother, feeding Lily breakfast, packing her lunch, and taking her to the park when the weather was nice. She spoke to her daughter in the same soft voice, kissed her goodnight with the same affection, but underneath it all, a dark cloud hovered over her every action. Claire had long since stopped being the mother Lily needed. She had become an automaton, going through the motions but emotionally absent. Lily didn't notice, or if she did, she couldn't comprehend the change. For her, Claire was still her protector, her world. She clung to her mother, asking her for stories and games, unaware that the person who should have been her guardian was planning to destroy everything they had. The day Claire chose to put her plan into action was cold and dreary. It was a day like any other, except for the suffocating weight that Claire carried with her. She told Lily that they were going on a special outing, just the two of them. It wasn't the first time they had gone for a little trip, so Lily didn't think anything of it. She was excited to spend time with her mom, to explore new places and have fun, just like they used to. Claire drove through familiar streets, but instead of heading to their usual destinations, she took a different route, one that led out of town. Lily, ever trusting, chatted excitedly about the things she'd seen on the way, blissfully unaware of the destination. As Claire drove, her heart pounded in her chest. The anxiety she had been suppressing for days swelled in her throat, but there was no turning back now. She had gone too far down this path to stop. They eventually arrived at an abandoned industrial site, a desolate place that had long been forgotten. The area was isolated, far from any help, and the perfect place for Claire to carry out her plan. As she parked the car, she looked at her daughter in the rearview mirror. Her heart briefly pangs with what seemed like sorrow, but it quickly turned to numbness. She forced a smile, reassuring Lily that everything would be fine. Lily skipped happily ahead, holding her mother's hand as they walked deeper into the site. Claire's thoughts raced. She felt detached from the moment, as though she were watching herself from above. Her breath was shallow, and she could feel her pulse in her ears. The pieces were almost in place, and all she had to do was follow through. As they reached a secluded area, Claire led Lily towards the furnace she had prepared. It was an old, rusted structure, the perfect size for what she had in mind. Claire's hands shook as she tried to steady herself, but she had already made up her mind. She motioned for Lily to step inside, telling her it was part of a special game they were playing. Lily, ever trusting, obeyed without question. It was a moment that Claire would never forget. The innocence in her daughter's eyes, the trusting way she followed her mother's instructions, and the knowledge that this would be the last moment of their lives together. The furnace roared to life. Claire hesitated for a split second, her heart caught between love and despair. But in the end, the weight of her decision, the exhaustion, and the guilt seemed to overwhelm her, and she stepped away, closing the door behind her. It was final. It was done. But even as the incinerator began to work, Claire's mind was already far away, lost in the haze of what she had just done. The emotional toll that would come crashing down on her, the memories of her daughter, of the way Lily had looked at her with such trust, now haunted Claire at every turn. She couldn't escape the image of her daughter's bright eyes, her joyful laugh, the way she had held her hand as they walked together to the site. And yet, Claire had been the one to destroy it all. Soon enough, Claire couldn't escape the gnawing feeling that something was wrong. The more she tried to convince herself that she had made the right decision, the more guilt crept in, making every moment a living nightmare. But the realization, too late and too overwhelming, was clear. There was no turning back. The truth was out there, waiting to catch up with her. Days turned into weeks, and the tension in the air grew unbearable. The investigation into Lily's disappearance showed no signs of letting up. News outlets began covering the case, and the small suburban town was now the center of attention. Claire had managed to keep her composure at first, but the constant pressure of the situation began to take its toll. The guilt weighed on her heavily, pressing down on her chest every time someone mentioned Lily's name. Neighbors who had once smiled and waved at Claire now looked at her with suspicion. There were whispers behind closed doors, murmurs of doubt that Claire could not shake off. Detectives began visiting her more frequently. They asked the same questions over and over again, each time with a little more intensity. They wanted to know about the last time she saw Lily, the details of their daily routine, and why Claire seemed so distant, so unbothered by her daughter's absence. Each time they came, Claire's heart raced, her mind spinning with the fear that they were getting closer to discovering the truth. She had to keep up the act, to maintain the illusion that she was just a grieving mother who didn't know where her child had gone. But the cracks in her facade were becoming too obvious to ignore. The police had started to connect the dots. They had questioned everyone who could have been involved in Lily's life, from neighbors to friends, but it wasn't long before the investigators began focusing solely on Claire. Her reluctance to engage with the investigation, her nervous demeanor, and the inconsistent details in her story made them suspicious. Detectives Miller and Harlow, who had been working on the case since the beginning, began to narrow their focus. There were too many inconsistencies in Claire's account of events, too many moments when she had seemed unsure of what had actually happened. Claire's paranoia intensified with each passing day. She spent more time alone in her house, pacing the rooms, staring out the window, waiting for the knock that would come at any moment. The weight of her actions started to sink in more deeply than she had ever anticipated. It wasn't just the loss of Lily. It was the realization that she had ruined her own life. She had hoped, perhaps naively, that after a while, the police would lose interest, that the search would stop. But with every new lead, with every fresh question from the authorities, it became clearer that there would be no escaping the consequences. Then, one night, the unthinkable happened. Claire was sitting in her living room, staring at the television, unable to focus on anything. The flickering images on the screen barely registered in her mind as she thought about how everything had gone wrong. The quiet of the house was broken by the loud sound of a knock on the door. It was late, too late for anyone to be coming around for anything trivial. Claire froze. Her pulse quickened, and the world seemed to narrow into a single point of focus. That knock. When she opened the door, she was met by 2 police officers. They looked at her with cold, unreadable expressions, and Claire's stomach twisted in knots. They didn't need to say anything. She knew why they were there. They had figured it out. Somehow, some way, the truth had finally come to light. Detective Miller and Detective Harlow stepped inside, their eyes scanning the room for anything that might suggest Claire's involvement in her daughter's disappearance. They didn't waste any time. Their first words were sharp, accusatory. They told Claire they had found evidence that linked her to the site where Lily had last been seen. Claire's heart sank. She couldn't believe it. She had thought she had covered her tracks, that she had been careful enough. But now, the walls were closing in. The detectives were no longer asking questions. They were making statements. They knew. As the truth unraveled, Claire felt as though she was slowly suffocating under the weight of it all. She tried to deny it, to tell herself that she wasn't the one responsible for what had happened, but deep down she knew she couldn't escape it. Her actions had been deliberate, calculated. The moment she had made the choice to end Lily's life, she had sealed her fate. The realization was horrifying, and yet it didn't bring the relief she had once imagined. Instead, it only deepened the despair that had been building inside her since that fateful day. By the time the authorities had gathered all the evidence, Claire's world had come crashing down. She was arrested and charged with the unthinkable. The woman who had once been a mother, a caretaker, had now become the villain in a horrific story, a story that would haunt the town for years to come. Claire had destroyed the one thing that meant the most to her, and in doing so, she had destroyed herself. The finality of it all hit her in a way nothing else could. She had lost everything.